Welcome everyone to this year's webinar, Utility Rebates, What's New in 2024. It's 1 o'clock now, so thank you all for joining us. We've got a lot to get through today, packed agenda, so I'm going to kick things off. Just a few housekeeping items first. We're using Zoom Webinar as our webinar platform this year. So throughout the session, you're welcome to ask any questions you may have using the Q&A option in your menu bar. For most of you, this will be at the bottom of your screen. At the end, we have some time set aside for Q&A, and we'll get to as many of these questions as we can. However, if you have any lingering questions at the end of the event, we'll also be providing contact information so you can reach out and get those answered. Also wanted to mention here that all registrants will be receiving a recording of this webinar following the event. You should have that by the end of the week. So you're welcome to share this out with anyone on your team who might find today's information useful, but maybe wasn't able to join us. You'll have access to all of that to share. I'm really excited to introduce you to today's panel of speakers from Incentive Energy. If you've joined us for a webinar before, these may be some familiar faces, but we've got Mike Cham, our CTO, Steve Bulbrook, our VP of Energy Efficiency Operations, and Kelly D. Thomas, our product manager. And then I'm Riley Knavish, I'm the product specialist on the team. Great group. We're really excited for you to hear what we have to share. And I'll kick things off by going over our agenda very quickly. So we'll start with some 2024 utility rebate trends across North America, focused on LED rebate program changes. We'll be covering program changes by state, by program, by product category, and we'll be covering both downstream and midstream programs. We'll move on to some other technology trends after this. This is where we'll be covering some HVAC trends, some networked lighting controls trends, horticultural lighting, and electric vehicle incentives across the United States. Finally, we'll conclude today's event with some tips and takeaways to help you leverage utility rebates, and as promised, some Q&A. Before we get into the meat of today's session, I did want to start with just a little bit of background about Incentive Energy. I know many of you on the call may have worked with us, whether it's through Incentive or through Utility Genius, but just a little bit about us. So Incentive Energy was founded over a decade ago, and we've transformed over that decade into a variety of scalable products that provide comprehensive, accessible program information and utility rebate estimates. All of our products are backed by our proprietary database, which contains 3,000 plus utilities across Canada and the United States. Our phenomenal team of in-house rebate experts work really hard to keep this information up to date and update programs as they change. So we're very confident in our data and its accuracy, and that's why we're able to provide analyses like we'll be going through today. That database is how we've pulled together all of this information to share with you. So as I said, some of you may have worked with us before. You may have a rebate finder or a payback widget through us, or you may have found us through our partner platform, Utility Genius. So Utility Genius, at its basic form, is a quick and simple way to find utility rebate information across the US and Canada. You can search for programs by zip code, by state, by name, and find all of the rebate information that you need on that program. We track all of the technologies we're including in our analysis today, plus a few more. And we're providing rebate estimates for these programs. We're providing you some high-level information about these programs. We're allowing you the option to get email updates when programs change, favorite the most relevant utilities to your work, and even track rebate opportunities and projects at individual address levels. So obviously, this is a super high-level overview of some of what we do and some of our background in the industry. If you're someone who's just getting started on your rebate journey or you want to learn more after this event, I'd recommend starting on Utility Genius to search up. And then if you have any further questions, you're welcome to reach out to us and we can walk you through the different options we have for connecting with your customers or your sales and marketing teams or contractors and property managers to ensure you're getting the information you need about how to take advantage of utility rebates. So super quick overview there, but now we're ready to get into the meat of our program. I'm going to kick things over to Mike Cham to walk you through some of our calculation methodologies and downstream rebates. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Riley. Just to review, this is the same slide we use every year, just to talk about our methodology. Basically what we're doing here, we are in our database. We track all changes over time, and so we're basically taking temperature at two different points in time. So we're looking at what we're talking about here today for most of the slides are the changes in programs between March 15th of last year and very recently. At the beginning of each calendar year is certainly a big time for many programs to update. Some of them are very timely. Some of them start their program off on Jan 1, but don't really make their program changes announced until second week of February. And so, hence the timing of when we start reviewing this, so that we get all the changes incorporated in the database. There are a few still stragglers out there, but the trends that we're seeing will certainly hold up across what we've been able to see so far. And so, again, what we do in terms of detecting where changes have been happening is we're looking at 10 major categories of both lighting and then HVAC. And we're looking at, okay, what was the highest rebate in that category the previous year? What's the highest rebate in that category this year, to provide some indication of where are utilities spreading their dollars around? Where are they placing their bets in terms of where they should allocate their program budgets? Some things we end up excluding. If a program goes through a major change where they're going from dollars per unit to kWh, it's not really very comparable, so we have to ignore that. But in general, the analysis that we'll do will provide sort of a sense of where the utilities are moving in aggregate, which can be a challenging thing to try to consider. And then we'll look at different trends that are going on, and sometimes in regions or by different types of utilities. So we can sort of tease that apart and see what's really going on underneath the hood. So on to the next slide, we're going to start with the original LED rebates. The downstream or prescriptive rebates, where the customer or sometimes their contractor will fill out a rebate application. They may get pre-approval, but regardless, the rebate is basically filled after the project's complete. Application goes in, that gets evaluated, and then the customer or the contractor gets sent a check later. That's the downstream or prescriptive rebates. These terms get tossed around. We're trying to be trying to encapsulate here's that level of kind of program. And so what we saw from the map is, and let me just walk you through it, is when we look at the spectrum of what changes went on, we saw some programs up generally 67% in terms of their incentive rates, and all the way down a third, down 33%. Gradients are tough. So what we've done is basically set sort of a top line and bottom line of anything that's 4% or greater is that dark green. Anything that's negative 4% or lower is that sort of tan yellow thing. And then you can kind of see in between, anything that's lying within between. So, we look at anything that's between -4 and +4% in terms of their change is roughly, either just, keeping up with inflation or, minor changes to the program. Anything outside that -4 to +4% is then a much more significant change that indicates some sort of direction the program's taking. And so, what you certainly see here is plenty of dark green, not much in terms of the pure negative downstrokes, and then plenty of sort of riding along and in between. It's striking this year. I think what we're seeing, and we'll get into a lot more detail. What we're seeing here is, when we've talked about this kind of changes over the last 2 or 3 years, I think COVID, I think, cast a little bit of a frost over how people were making any changes to their program. I think there was a lot of uncertainty as to what was going on. And so, we saw a bit more of a muted view towards making changes in the programs. This year, things got a lot more dynamic, both in the downstream prescriptive, as well as Steve Bollebrook will cover the midstream or instant rebates. I think programs have, you know, whether it's COVID related or not, this year we saw a lot more dynamic changes, a lot more, you know, sharper moves going on both sides of, you know, both up and down in terms of where utilities are making their adjustments. Some of the curious, you know, so overall the trend when we look at all the utilities and weight them, what we were seeing for lighting is an overall trend up about 6%, when you balance it all out. The trends that we're seeing though, and so up 6%. Keep going. Go back. Sorry, not done yet. That part of the stats we saw were, you know, we saw 26 programs or 26 states were roughly up in terms of where their LED rebates were, and 9 were on the downside in terms of states, and the rest were sort of in between. In terms of trends that we saw you know, across all these programs, strangely, you know, given all of the information going on about the ISA or ESA, whichever way you want to say it, EISA, that caused the baselines to change for screw-in bulbs, we did not see a lot of changes for screw-in bulbs for 2024. In fact, we saw several programs actually increase their incentives for screw-in bulbs. Don't have a great explanation there. You know, but it definitely seems as if you know, from a commercial lighting perspective, at least for 2024, we're still seeing, you know, fairly robust support for downstream, or, you know, there are programs like California and Massachusetts that had dropped screw-in bulbs, and it's not like they brought them back, but we were still seeing people hanging on to screw-in bulbs and downlights as part of their 2024 program. We're also seeing, obviously, the Pacific Northwest, big solid dark greens there. You know, they're perennial supporters of these LED programs. You know, Idaho Power was up between 25 and 50% in terms of what their rates were. Rocky Mountain Power up 11%. Energy Trust, you know, was in Oregon taking up their downlights. Strangely, Mass Save, when you look at what's in their lighting program, you know, they were generally up about 32% in terms of what they were you know, incentivizing in LED. The changes in California, you know, there isn't a whole lot of lighting rebates at all within the major utilities in California. And so most changes there are driven by the smaller municipalities that, you know, certainly have their own programs. In Illinois there, you know, slightly, you know, it's a down, but it's a slight, predominantly dominated by a slight reduction in the ComEd program in Chicago. Otherwise, the rest of the you know, Illinois is actually pretty steady. Iowa, Steve Boldbrook will talk about this more later. Iowa eliminated, you know, the major utilities in Iowa eliminated their downstream programs for lighting altogether, but they rolled it all into midstream. So, which is you know, in the end, the same measures are all being incentivized. They've just decided to go with the midstream path there. And then, you know, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, the program there, they have really been on the upswing. So last year we saw, I think, almost a doubling in rates for indoor lighting. And then they've done another percentage increase. So I have it on the next slide. Continuing a heavy focus on indoor lighting within that TVA program, which is important because, you know, TVA does cover 6 or 7 states, you know, all of Tennessee and big parts of Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, etc. So, you know, overall, actually still a very positive picture in terms of LED for 2024 and the downstream programs. And we'll go into a little bit more detail now. Next slide. And so just covering some specifics for a couple programs. I actually had to dig pretty hard to find an individual program that had a significant downward change. So Cedar Falls, Iowa, you get the winner there. They made just an overall reduction there. I can't call, you know, having lived in Iowa for a little while, I understand Cedar Falls, but I don't know that it's going to be a bellwether for the whole country. ComEd, again, that slight reduction overall. They just made an adjustment about 6.25% overall in their overall rate for their program there for downstream. So, probably just, making some adjustments there to account for changes in the rest of their portfolio. Jumping over the TVA, an overall 17.5% increase. Indoor lighting was up 25% by itself. So, TVA continuing, TVA has actually hit 10 cents per kWh in terms of what their incentive rates are, which, relative to a lot of other states that are doing, kWh based incentives, it's a lot. So certainly a big increase there, the TVA. Entergy New Orleans, rarely do we ever feature Louisiana within our presentations here, but Entergy New Orleans did a big giant 40% increase, big increase across the board in LED fixtures. And then there's a slight error in here. It's not PSEG, it's Puget Sound Energy, PSE. Overall, up about 88%. They doubled their max rebate on a number of different fixture categories. So, really, what we're definitely seeing some bigger moves, a bit more of a dynamic nature of where people are making their changes in these programs. So exciting to see, still a lot of action going on here in the downstream programs for LED. Next slide. And so, this is actually a little bit boring. Just reflecting, when we do an unweighted average change across both the positive and negative changes in rebates by category, still seeing across the board positive increase in rates. There's screw-ins, still seeing an overall increase in the rates on screw-ins, despite, again, the changes within baselines from ISA. There's, still, I would say the one other trend we're seeing is still more of a focus on, within downstream programs of focusing on fixtures over lamps. We see that both in terms of where rate changes are happening, as well as how utilities are allocating fixtures versus lamps between their downstream prescriptive programs and their midstream instant programs. So, that will continue, and it's certainly a trend that's going on there. So, pretty good report in terms of where LED's going for these downstream programs. So I hopefully that is useful information for everybody, and I'll turn it over to Steve Bollebrook to talk about what the changes in the other half of the utility portfolio, the midstream programs.
Thanks, Mike. So we're going to be following the same general progression here, starting at the state level and talking about midstream rebates the way that Mike did for downstream. I'm sure many of you or most of you or all of you know, but just to recap, midstream incentives are paid at the distributor level. Those discounts are typically passed along to the contractor, excuse me, or a self-install customer at the point of purchase. The distributor provides the incentive through a discounted price, and then they work with the utility directly to be reimbursed for that incentive, so the customer doesn't have any paperwork requirements. So generally speaking, easier access, to rebates and incentives than downstream programs. And so that's a big reason why utilities have utilized midstream. As Mike went over with the downstream program changes by state, the Keller gradient here is showing the nature and magnitude of change with that same scale provided. So you can have that as a reference point for seeing where the midstream changes are with respect to utilities, and where we see increases and decreases. The gray area there are still programs that do not currently have midstream lighting rebates available. So a little bit different, I guess, than the downstream, where it's a little bit spotty here with midstream showing, relative to each other, some increases, some decreases. But overall, I would say we're seeing stability New York has the highest change overall. They're just over 25%, sort of at that top end. Indiana showed increases last year, and they're not too far behind New York this year, at 23% across the state. And then at the other end of the scale, we have Idaho. They've got the greatest average decrease, down 35%. Pennsylvania is sort of interesting because they still have strong incentive levels, but we are seeing some reductions there, and they're heading into the third year of a 5-year program cycle. And actually, that'll be coming here at the end of May. And so it's likely that they're starting to reduce there in order to preserve funding. A lot of times programs will do that to make sure that they can still maintain access to rebates just by making some incremental changes down rather than leaving incentive levels up and allowing the program to run out of money. Which that has negative effects on, people having access to these things and remembering that they're available, for the next cycle around. So very similar to downstream, I think midstream programs are doing well. The number of states maintaining incentive levels or increasing them, is at 24 total states, and only 9 states had decreases, which, outside of Idaho, most of those were relatively minor changes. And we'll see that a little bit more as we talk about some of the individual utilities in the next slide. So here we're just getting into some additional details, from the state view down to some specific utilities that are driving the midstream changes. Baltimore Gas and Electric, they increased incentives for their high bays and linear ambient 2x4 fixtures, as well as their outdoor fixtures, the wall-mounted area, parking garage, and area roadway luminaires. And they also increased incentives for linear replacement lamps, which is an interesting trend that I think Mike was seeing as well, with some of these long-standing lamps still seeing some increases in the programs. Con Edison in New York, they increased their instant discounts by 36% across their portfolio. They specifically increased them for high bays, area and roadway luminaires. Plus, they have a 25% bonus that's in place right now for all the fixture categories that they incentivize. So, really robust program for them in New York. Back in Maryland with Potomac Edison, they increased incentives for linear replacement lamps as well. Also, the replacement lamps for high bays, and then also their outdoors, that this time only just for wall-mounted area luminaires and roadway luminaires. In PA, as we talked about at the state level, PPL there was sort of the utility in the state that made the most significant changes. They have reductions to high bays, replacement lamps for high bays, as well as the wall-mounted area luminaires, and they're down about 33%. And then Rocky Mountain Power was really the one driving the changes in Utah. That program made reductions to incentive levels 2 years ago in Idaho. And then we saw it last year. They did the same thing in Utah. So Idaho's back this year with their reductions for linear replacement lamps and screw-in lamps. So a couple of the more long-standing, sort of midstream categories, they're just ratcheting back the incentive levels there. And as we talk about the product level at the next slide, you'll see how some of that is manifesting itself. So as Mike mentioned, with downstream, the same thing we talked about there is the same thing we're looking at here, with trends from a category to category across the US. And these are unweighted averages across the utilities. So obviously the difference here is that we're seeing, increases as well as decreases within midstream. And last year we only saw the screw-in use case with a slight decrease and everything else was increased. So here, like I said, a little bit of back and forth. Screw in is being reduced again, but now downlight replacement lamps and replacement lamps for high bays are also going to seeing slight decreases. And for the most part, I think this aligns with the longevity of these rebates provided for these products. You know, first in downstream and now in midstream, you know, they've been there for a while. And so, you know, starting to move those back, as well as they're, you know, bringing in more fixtures. So trying to incentivize those more and shifting the funding in that direction. You know, so you know, that's sort of a trend. In contrast, though, you know, linear replacement lamps, they fit a similar profile to those other types. You know, they've been in programs for a long time and have been around for a long time, but, you know, we are seeing them rebound here in 24 and increase, which is, you know, it's encouraging. I think, you know, seeing programs still offer these, I think speaks to the fact that there's still a lot of opportunity out there to be replacing old technology with LED. And then also fixtures, 2x4 troffers, high bays are seeing increases, as well as the outdoor side of things with wall mounted area, parking garage, and area and roadway luminaires. So again, sort of up and down, but for the most part, you know, fixtures are increasing, and it's more some of the longer standing items that are starting to see a downward trend. And then next, we're going to talk about some changes that are not covered by our year-to-year analysis. You know, so as Mike talked about with our calculation methodology, and then he alluded to this change as well. You know, we're looking at incentive level changes from 23 to 24. So the removal of LED lighting programs or the shifting of programs from downstream to midstream is not something that's represented in the analysis that we've been talking through to this point. So we recognize that, you know, changes like that are critical. And while we're not seeing that utilities are removing their LED lighting programs, several utilities have ended their LED downstream programs and are moving all, excuse me, all LED incentives to midstream. You know, so as we described, you know, the differences between the two programs, downstream and midstream, utilities are embracing those differences and trying to take advantage of midstream programs as a more efficient way to reach their customer base. And so in 24, so far, we've seen the programs listed here move on from prescriptive programs or downstream programs and offer incentives for LED categories through midstream only. You know, Mike, I think, touched upon Iowa there with Mid-American and Alliant both showing up. Ontario is doing that with their program launch up in Canada. And then Illinois and New York making those changes, with Con Edison's not going into effect until the second quarter this year, but they have talked about that coming. So, you know, this is an important trend to keep track of. You know, we think as utilities continue to look at better ways to engage their customers, you know, and make it easier for them to have access to incentives for more LED categories, you know, sort of as they're seeing that shift into the fixtures and, you know, more fixture types. We think these kinds of changes from downstream to midstream could be happening more and more. And that's something that we'll continue to keep track of. Now Mike is going to talk about some changes related to fluorescent lighting.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, it was, you know, this issue around fluorescent bans got raised sort of middle of last year, and it's something we've been tracking and wanted to report out on a little bit. I'm just resharing here something that ACEEE covered last year, talking about states that are going through a fluorescent ban process. And, you know, what we're talking about here is, you know, this is more of an environmentally driven issue around mercury content within fluorescent as they're being disposed. You know, when you inappropriately dispose of fluorescent tubes in the environment, you know, mercury links, can leak into the, wherever landfills or wherever that's happening. And, that's not really great stuff. And so, what we've been seeing is then some states, we sort of had a run here and then everything's been on pause. We haven't seen any legislatures move any banning forward. But, so this schedule is still all that really is out there. Maryland's taking a look at it, but it's just sitting in committee right now and unclear whether it's going to move forward anymore. We raise this as an issue just because this can, if fluorescent tubes are being banned from sale within a particular state, then when you think about energy efficiency for lighting, if fluorescents are not available, much like incandescent bulbs are going to not be available or are no longer available, then the need for incentives for the LED replacement versions of those become less easy to justify. We're not raising this up as a big warning, but it's something that we're tracking and seeing what's going on. So, the screw-in based CFL phase out, we're not overly concerned about. It's more the fluorescent tubes that present a little bit more of something to really take a look at. When you think of inefficient interior lighting in offices or retail or wherever, certainly fluorescent has been, where that's been, or even within a high bay setting, there's certainly plenty of, 8 lamp T5s and all that kind of stuff in the big box retail stores. So, it's something to be looking for, and then we actually have we've finally seen an example of what's going to end up happening. So Vermont this year, or a few months ago, beginning of the year, had their fluorescent tube phase out. The impact of what we saw then in terms of what Vermont did is sort of the surgical strike in terms of, how they made adjustments in their program. So basically Vermont at this point only runs a midstream program for lighting at this point. And so what they've done is they removed high bays and other sort of interior fixtures from their program, but left in all the outdoor, left in HID replacement lamps, anything that for which fluorescent isn't really a solution. Those rebates are still live and running, and there doesn't seem to be anything to change that in the future. So, Vermont gives us a little bit of view of like what could the impact be should a state decided to make a fluorescent ban actually in practice within that state. So, we're going to be tracking Oregon and Colorado and I guess Rhode Island are next up on the list for next year. Those programs are still going strong this year. So, we'll see what ends up happening within those states as we continue to roll forward. But, if fluorescent ban is something that's going on within a state, then, it's just something to keep track of. So just wanted to bring this up as a little bit of something to watch out for. This is probably the biggest, topic that could be out there in terms of, having some impact on commercial lighting, in any way that you could say they could go away, but we're not seeing a tremendous amount of activity out there, and this could just be some early days in terms of some of these states are a little bit more active when it comes to mercury and environmental cleanup. Next slide. So enough of lighting, or at least enough of lighting for a second. We're going to go back to some lighting related things here in a minute. But wanted to provide a little bit of overview in terms of what's going on in the HVAC world. There's certainly a tremendous amount of focus on fun topics like heat pumps, especially given the IRA program that someday will finally fire up. And so we collect the same amount of information on the commercial HVAC programs and want to provide another overview of what we're seeing there. And it's, again, I'd say it's getting to be fairly dynamic. And so similar kind of approach, the -4 +4, This is a look at the downstream programs that have been going on with HVAC and sort of where the changes are. We're focused on electric only. We're not taking a look at gas within this analysis. What we saw across the board is a 7% increase in downstream HVAC rebates. With some interesting little stories within there. TVA, I'm going to keep talking about TVA. TVA doubled their HVAC rates last year, and then this year they introduced some new efficiency tiers. So they are offering for a number of the HVAC categories. If you hit higher efficiency rates, higher efficiency levels with your SEER, ER, or HSPF, they're offering even higher rates per ton on that. This is sort of introducing this differentiated rate schedule for the first time. To focus on some individual changes, Rocky Mountain Power in Utah, this is actually interesting. They made a 25 to 75% increase in their rates for heat pumps only, right? That's one of the other one of the things we're starting to see is a differentiation in how programs are treating traditional central AC units versus the heat pump versions of them. We're definitely seeing a greater emphasis on heat pumps, both sort of generic heat pumps, as well as then some separation for separating out and separately incentivizing heat pumps that qualify as cold climate heat pumps. Cold climate heat pumps, we're typically seeing where those have been separated out. We're starting to see higher per ton rates for the cold climate heat pumps than their traditional non-cold climate heat pump as well. And just as another interesting point, the Quebec program, Hydro-Quebec, did a 300% increase in their rates for HVAC, and especially for the heat pumps. Generally we're just seeing this sort of this focus on this as heat pump technology is getting better and better and more efficient. Programs are seemingly starting to pay much more attention there. And I think also looking at the federal dollars that are going to be starting to come down through, because even for the IRA, multifamily is going to be able to be qualified. So there's going to be that amount of where the commercial programs can overlap between, energy efficiency programs from utilities as well as the federal programs. Very positive picture in terms of the HVAC rebates, especially around heat pumps. And then the other half of the equation is the midstream programs. So, midstream or instant rebates for HVAC, they've been around for some amount of time. But what we're seeing is both new programs being introduced. We tracked 6 new programs from major utilities being introduced last year to this year. Just starting off the ground midstream programs. And then within those midstream programs, the heat pumps are within all the midstream programs, they're just the heat pumps are just being continued introduced as a popular category with them. Far more than more traditional AC units. Overall, we're tracking, depending on how you want to count utilities, about 38 programs from the major utilities for midstream HVAC rebates. So I'd say really positive news around HVAC, and we'll be continuing to track this and focus on as we go forward, especially I think the rise in the cold climate heat pumps is definitely going to be an interesting trend to be keeping track of especially in the northern half of the US and up into Canada. So that's our little break for HVAC. Now back to Kelly, I think, right?
That's right. Thank you, Mike. Our horticulture LED lighting analysis today focuses on the types of programs offered state by state, looking at whether a program incentivizes products based on a per fixture basis, or if energy savings is used to calculate the rebate. In addition to seeing an increase in the number of programs added over the past year, many programs are moving toward energy savings-based calculations over the per fixture. Some notable examples of these include Commonwealth Edison in Illinois, who is currently incentivizing based on photosynthetic photon efficacy, or PPE, improvement per watt, with a PPE minimum requirement. What is PPE, you might ask? It measures a grow light's efficiency for converting electrical energy into PAR light, which is the spectrum of light used by plants for photosynthesis. Also of note, Arizona Public Service, which is incentivizing based on total photosynthetic photon flux, or PPF, at different stages of the growth cycle. PPF is a measure of the total amount of PAR produced by a light in a given second. Keeping with this trend, the DLC released their version 3.0 horticulture technical requirements last March, which have increased efficacy threshold, a new reporting requirement, as well as product level controllability requirements. In order to qualify for certification with the DLC, products will now have to meet these requirements, and we'll be seeing a delisting event of the version 2.1 products on March 31st of this year. Next, we'll take a look at networked lighting controls. LED products are already highly efficient and can be optimized through the use of controls. Taking it a step further, in order to achieve maximum efficiency, controls can be interconnected through the use of a networked lighting control system. Due to the amount of control that these systems give building operators over their energy consumption, we are seeing many utilities incentivizing this technology. In addition to energy saving based calculation methods, we're also seeing programs incentivizing these systems per fixture, per sensor, or per square foot. Over the past year, we've seen some programs added, especially in states like Connecticut, Mississippi, New Hampshire, and even Ohio. Next, we'll take a look at electric vehicle and electric vehicle charging incentives. What a great map to see. Overall, we're seeing a saturation of electric vehicle and the infrastructure, charging infrastructure needed to power them, popping up across the country, with basically every single state having some type of utility program available, with an emphasis on fleet electrification as well as infrastructure. This focus to create the charging network needed to support a transition to electric vehicles will only continue to help reduce range anxiety, as well as supporting the continued shift in public opinion toward vehicle electrification. So just a quick little analysis of some of the other technologies that we do cover here. All of this information was pulled from our Utility Genius tool. So talking about how you can use this rebate information, we've thrown a lot at you today. How can you take it away and benefit from it? So we recommend using incentives in everything that you're doing day to day. Rebates are most beneficial when you're proactive with them. You can help your customers make better purchasing decisions. With that money saved from rebates, they can either invest in a better quality product or even choose to begin another energy efficiency upgrade project in tandem. We also recommend that you use rebates to expand your sales territory by focusing on regions with more lucrative utility rebates where maybe you haven't been working in the past. Also, we recommend incorporating rebates into your marketing strategy across all mediums. Everything from targeted campaigns, email campaigns, social media content, and even blog posts. Incentives make for very great educational content. As the experts here, we do have plenty of recommendations and we're always happy to help. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're looking to incorporate rebates into your marketing or sales strategies. And then taking a look at everything we've covered today, some of our main highlights. There is an increase in midstream rebates, with some programs even going as far as going midstream only. Also, keep an eye out on fluorescent bans in some of your states. And prescriptive programs are rebounding, shaking off after ESA. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm going to ask all of our speakers to come back on for a second so we can have some time for Q&A. We've got about 15 minutes. So like I said, at the beginning of the session, please drop those questions in our Q&A box at the bottom menu. We've already got a couple rolling in, so we'll get started. So one question we've been asked that I should have mentioned in my intro spiel, so sorry about that, is whether the HVAC information is inclusive of both commercial and residential incentives or just one or the other. So I believe this is all commercial information. That's what we primarily focus on. I don't know, Mike, if you want to elaborate a little bit on the HVAC specifically.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely focused on the commercial side only, just keeping in line with what we normally do. We are, when we finally see some IRA programs actually, started up, we will certainly reevaluate that. But yeah, that's where our focus certainly has been.
Thank you, Mike. Kind of speaking of the IRA, I know we didn't touch on it this time, but it was a huge focus last year. Is there anything we should be keeping an eye out? Any updates on that as we're going into 2024? It'd be important to shout out.
Good question. And I think I'm gonna piggyback to that over the IIJA as well. But from the IRA, I mean, we're just continuing to watch and see, the threats. I remember being at a conference last, February 2023, when everyone was talking about, end of summer of 2023, we might see some programs up and running. Obviously, that time has come and passed, and we're well past it. The latest, we're trying to keep abreast of this as anyone else. We're still seeing some programs. I think New Mexico is pretty far out in front in terms of they have submitted to the DOE their plans for how they'd like to roll out their programs. I think New York is not too far behind. It's unknown how long it's going to take to get through that part of the process for the IRA to do all the evaluation of how they're having to submit plans on how are they going to actually accomplish all the goals, how they're going to implement the strategies that the IRA's laid out. And so, I'm fairly certain that we'll see some of the states roll out programs this year. As to when, this is all new and it's an election cycle and all kinds of fun things are all going to go into this. So we'll see what happens there. The IIJA, just to touch on that real quick, that is still going strong. There's a lot of interest in IIJA grant funding for energy efficiency projects across the board. That's something that we're taking on into our Utility Genius platform later this year, being able to add in all the IIJA programs, as well as any other related sort of energy efficiency related grant programs into our system, which will also then lay the groundwork for us to as IRA programs come out, at least from if we try to keep with our commercial focus, at least from a multifamily perspective, being able to lay in some of that IRA, which would then obviously, what would work for multifamily in theory will also work for, straight residential. So we'll be starting to see some of that information in our system as well.
Awesome. Thank you. It's good information. I know everyone on this call has probably been eagerly waiting for some of these programs to go live for sure. Great. Got another one from the audience here. So as utilities shift dollars from downstream to midstream programs, are those midstream programs still accessible to firms that focused on C&I market retrofits for lighting and HVAC?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, typically those programs are focused on the distributor participating, right? That's the general entry point for the rebate. And so I think you know, so long as, you know, your firm is working with a distributor that's enrolled, you know, that's something that you would want to look at, rather than, you know, filling out the downstream application yourself or working with a customer to do that. You're going to want to buy the products. Make sure you're buying the products from an enrolled distributor. In the program, most midstream programs have, you know, on their site, they'll provide a list of who is enrolled so that you can go and identify that yourself. But certainly, you know, it's also a question you can ask. And, you know, for the most part, if you work with a distributor that is not enrolled, but it's who you're familiar with, a lot of times, you know, they're able to go ahead and go through the enrollment process so that they can offer the incentives. You know, it might take, you know, a little bit of time to do that, but a lot of, in most instances, when you describe that situation to the utilities, you know, they're more than happy to work with the distributor and get things set up so that you can take advantage. You know, their goal is definitely, you know, inclusion, right? They're not looking to turn away interested parties from these programs, incentivizing energy efficiency. So, you know, I would say, to recap that, you know, look to see if who you're working with is enrolled. If they're not, talk to them about it. And depending on their response, also talk to the utility or the implementer, you know, and make them aware of what the situation is, and they'll definitely help you.
Awesome, thank you. It's a great overview. Stepping outside of the scope of utility rebates a little bit, someone's asked about federal programs and whether or not we track anything like grants or loans at the federal level.
Yeah, just reiterating a little bit what I, you know, or retouching on what I said before. Yeah, we're not tracking it in the database today, but we are embarking on that right now. So, you know, the expectation would be we'll roll out some initial programs here in the next, you know, probably by the end of Q2, and then with a fast, rapid expansion to a lot more federal programs, you know, here by the end of the year.
For sure, stay tuned for that for those of you on the call waiting for that information. Great. Give it one more minute if anyone has any last questions to bring in, and then we'll wrap things up for today. So if anyone has any questions that we didn't get to during the session today, or anything that you think of after the fact, you can reach us at the email address listed here, hello@incentiveenergy.com. One of us will get back to you. I think we all get emails from that inbox. So reach out to us there if you've got any questions, and we'll get you what you need. If you have any questions about rebate information, or you want to get started on finding information yourself for your teams or your projects, recommend you start on app.utilitygenius.com. And then if you have any questions about using the tool or any of our other tools, again, reach out and we'll help get you started. And then, of course, stay tuned for any future webinars and events we'll be hosting. We're hoping to scale this up a little bit in the coming year and have more opportunities for you guys to learn. So keep an eye out for that. Like I said, everyone will get the recording of this webinar after the event. So yeah, that's everything we've got for today. Thank you all very much for attending. Thank you, Kelly, Steve, and Mike, for volunteering an hour of your day to go through all this information, and have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone.
Thank you.